Welcome to this presentation on using the graphic organizer for major essay 2 planning to be heard. As much as we want to be like that little boy just screaming our argument into the world, we actually have to plan how we're going to be heard. They don't listen the louder we get, but it's such a cute image. So the graphic organizer, it looks similar to the one that we used in major essay 1. It's a place to keep track of ideas, quotations, because that's new for this essay, and the sources where you get those quotations. Remember that there's an approved list of sources. And the other thing that this graphic organizer is going to be doing is generating material that can become part of your essay. And really, the more time you spend filling out this graphic organizer, the more you're already going to have to plug into your essay when you start drafting it. So the graphic organizer, just reminders, there are different ways to do it. If you write in it on the computer in Word, you can go over a page. It'll just keep expanding as you add more. If you handwrite your notes, that's fine. Just turn in a picture or a scan of it, but just print extra blank pages if you need to go over. So at the top of the graphic organizer, you will have a description of what you need to be putting in that column. And there is a method behind our madness. And the graphic organizer is tied directly to the outline to fill in later for major essay 2. If you look at the body paragraphs, you'll notice that there's evidence and then 2 types of analysis. And that first piece of evidence, that is what you're filling out in column 1. The analysis, the first piece of analysis, you're filling out and taking notes on in column 2. And the second part of analysis is in column 3. So you know where you're going to put this information from the graphic organizer when you go to put it in your outline. So this first column, you're recording evidence about the strategies. So you have to have paragraphs about ethos, pathos, and logos, but then you're going to choose an effective strategy to use and choose a pitfall. So in this first column, you're going to give a summary of the strategy. So when you go to write about it later, you can remember what the heck it is. And feel free to give quotations here that help you remember that or you think you might want to use later. If you do put a quotation in there, make sure that you're putting quotation marks so you know that it's someone else's words, and make note of which source you got it from so you don't have to go hunt through them all again later. And make note of any personal evidence you have that you think would support this evidence or help explain it to your reader. The middle column is the analysis, is the plan for applying that strategy. So now that you've explained that strategy in the first column, how are you planning to use it or avoid the strategy? Like, how could you use it to your advantage? If it's something that is potentially a pitfall, how would you avoid it or use it carefully? So it's your plan for action. And the third column is the predicted effect. So how effective do you think this plan for the strategy could be? What are some potential benefits, strengths of the strategy? What are some potential pitfalls with the strategy? Basically, how well do you think it's going to work on your audience? You do have an example of a filled-in graphic organizer that you can look at to see ideas for how to fill it out. And this graphic organizer goes along with the example essay called Creating Miss Clean. And when I was filling this out, I was trying to be very careful to show how information was connected. If I were handwriting this, I just would have done lines and arrows to show the connection, but that's harder when you're typing. So I use color and spacing to show what belonged with what. And by the time I filled it out, I had 3 pages. And you'll notice I had each strategy was its own color. So I have 5 strategies that I've discussed on here. You can discuss as many as you need. You will need to discuss 5 strategies in your essay: ethos, pathos, logos, a strategy you think will be helpful, and a pitfall one. So you're going to want to get at least 5 strategies on your graphic organizer. But remember, you're keeping track of ideas as you encounter them. So just because you put one on here doesn't mean you absolutely have to use it. It just means, hey, this is what it is. These are my notes for later. So I don't have to relearn something and spend all of that time. All right. So let's talk about one of the examples I have on this graphic organizer. I started by recording which strategy I was writing about, and I wanted to make sure it was easy to tell them apart, so I put it in bold just to make it stand out. And then I went ahead and gave a quotation right away from the source. So I listed the source first, and then I gave the quotation. I put quotation marks around it so I would remember that it was a quote and not me. And you'll notice that that's a pretty long quote, but I didn't worry too much about it here because I wanted to give enough so that when I came back to it in a week or so, I would have enough to understand what the author was saying. And I'd probably cut it down so that, like, if I used it, cut it down to make it fit better in my paper. And I even left myself a note that says, only use part of the quote. So I don't use the whole, remember, I didn't want to use the whole thing. All right. In the analysis plan for application, I took notes on ways that I thought I could plan to use the strategy. I also wrote down things to avoid or not do. Even if I wasn't sure if I would use an idea, I'd write it down just in case. So it ended up being easier for me to label them in terms of plans I could use, plans I could avoid. That just made it easier in my head. And what I noticed is I didn't end up using everything that I put in this column, but I was happy to have it there so that I remembered later. And then in this last column, the analysis predicted effect, I wrote down my thoughts about how the person would react to my plans for using that strategy. Again, I recorded my ideas, whether I was sure I would use them eventually in the essay or not. I ended up using a lot of it. Some of it I just copied and pasted. It was really handy. So that is graphic organizer for Manage Your Essay 2. Remember, you can look at the example filled out one, and please let us know if you have any questions.